I sat in a private dining room I had booked myself, watching a candle burn down like it was timing my dignity. 70 years old, and I was still capable of making one stupid, hopeful mistake. Believing my own family would show up if I set the table nicely enough. The maitre d' had already come in twice, polite but curious, asking if he should hold the courses. I told him yes the first time, smiled the second, and by the third I stopped pretending. No one was coming. Not my husband Duncan. Not my son. Not my daughter. Not even a late apology call. Just silence. Thick and deliberate. I checked my phone again anyway. A couple of hollow notifications. Nothing from the people who were supposed to know exactly where I was tonight. I had sent the reservation details myself. I had reminded them. I had even chosen the menu carefully. Things they liked. Things that made it feel like a proper occasion. There was a saffron risotto on the list I knew Duncan used to love. I almost laughed at that. Old habits, I suppose. Feeding people who had long stopped feeding anything back. So I did the only thing left that didn't make me feel small. I ordered dessert. It arrived like a quiet insult. Delicate. Perfect. Untouched by disappointment. A pear tarte de tatin with a thin glaze that caught the candlelight. I ate it slowly, alone, in a room meant for celebration. I didn't rush. I didn't check my phone again. I let the silence sit there with me, heavy and honest, until it stopped hurting and started clarifying. When the bill came, I looked at it for a moment, then added a 40% tip. Not because the service was extraordinary, though it was good. Because I refused to let this night turn me into something bitter and small. The staff had shown up. That counted for something. I walked out with my coat over my arm and my back straight. No calls, no messages, no explanations waiting to ambush me in the car. Just the clean, cold understanding that if I wanted closure, I was going to have to create it myself. By the time I started the engine, I already knew what the first step would be. I didn't drive home. I opened my phone, pulled up a number I hadn't touched in years, and pressed call before I could second-guess myself. "Hello," I said when the line connected, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. "Yes, I'd like to begin divorce proceedings." "Hello, darlings. I'll say this straight. Being forgotten is one thing, but this kind of silence? That's not a mistake, that's a message." And she heard it exactly right. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly the way it always had. Neat, quiet, indifferent. No lights left on for me. No trace that anyone had even considered I might be out celebrating something. I sat in the car for a moment longer than necessary, not because I was hesitating, but because I was recalibrating. There's a difference. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and something reheated hours ago. A plate sat in the sink, rinsed but not washed. Duncan's habit. Always halfway done, like most things he'd touched in the last 10 years. I set my coat down carefully, the same way I used to when the house still felt like it belonged to both of us. My phone buzzed just as I stepped into the kitchen. A message from him. "Sorry, things ran late. We'll celebrate tomorrow." No explanation, no question. Not even a mention of where he'd been or why he hadn't called. Just a casual rescheduling of my 70th birthday, like it was a dentist appointment. I stared at the message long enough to understand something very clearly. This wasn't forgetfulness. Forgetting comes with scrambling, apologies, noise. This was quiet, comfortable, assumed. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the folder I hadn't touched in years. Financial records, property documents, old agreements. The kind of things you keep organized when you've spent a lifetime making sure everything holds together. My father used to say that paper tells the truth people try to avoid. Tonight, I finally felt ready to listen. At first, nothing seemed out of place. Statements, balances, routine transfers. Then I noticed something small. A pattern. Transfers that didn't quite match our usual rhythm. Not large enough to alarm, but consistent enough to form a line if you bothered to connect the dots. I sat down at the table and started tracing them. Same destination account. Repeated intervals. Increasing amounts. Not my signature. Not my approval. I leaned back slightly, letting the realization settle instead of rushing past it. There's a particular kind of betrayal that doesn't explode. It aligns, piece by piece, quietly, until the picture becomes impossible to ignore. Another message came in, this time from my daughter. "Mom, don't make this a big deal. We'll do something nice this weekend." Don't make this a big deal. I actually smiled at that. Not because it was funny, but because it confirmed everything I needed to know. They had already decided the scale of my reaction, already agreed, somewhere between themselves, that this was manageable, that I was manageable. That was their second mistake. I closed the folder gently, not out of hesitation, but out of precision. There's no need to rush when the truth is already moving in your favor. I walked to the cabinet, poured myself a glass of water, and stood there for a moment, listening to the quiet of the house that suddenly felt very temporary. Then I picked up my phone again. Not to call Duncan, not to answer my daughter. I dialed the bank first. By the time I hung up, the tone of the conversation had shifted in a way I appreciated. Formal, alert, careful. Flags would be placed. Access reviewed. Nothing dramatic yet. Just enough to ensure that whatever had been happening quietly would no longer move unchecked. After that, I called my attorney again. "Yes," I said, when she picked up, my voice even, controlled. "I'd like to move forward immediately, and I'll need you to look at a few financial irregularities as well." There was a pause on the line, the kind professionals make when they recognize the weight of what's being said. "Of course," she replied. I ended the call and placed the phone down with deliberate calm. Upstairs, I could hear Duncan moving around, unaware that anything had changed. Drawers opening, water running. The ordinary sounds of a man who believed tomorrow would look exactly like yesterday. I didn't go up to meet him. Not yet. Instead, I turned off the kitchen light, leaving the house in a softer kind of darkness, and allowed myself one final clear thought before the next steps began. They didn't forget me. They just didn't think I would do anything about it. Morning didn't arrive gently. It came with the sound of Duncan moving around upstairs like nothing had shifted, like the ground beneath him wasn't already giving way. I made coffee the way I always had, precise, measured. A pinch of cardamom I'd picked up years ago and never abandoned. Small rituals matter. They remind you who you are when other people start rewriting you in their heads. He came down 10 minutes later, adjusting his cuff like he had somewhere important to be. He looked at me, paused just long enough to register that I was already awake, already composed, and then gave me that half smile I used to mistake for warmth. "Morning," he said. "About last night." I raised a hand slightly, not dramatic. Just enough. "Don't," I said, calm and even. "Not yet." That unsettled him more than if I'd shouted. He poured himself coffee, watched me over the rim of the cup, recalculating. I could see it happening. The shift from casual dismissal to mild concern. He wasn't worried about me. He was trying to understand what version of me he was dealing with this morning. I said we'd make it up this weekend, he added, lighter this time, like he was offering something generous. I looked at him then, properly, not as my husband, as a man standing in a house that no longer protected him. I'm sure you did, I replied. Silence stretched between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Not for me. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't filling it for his benefit. My phone buzzed again on the table. This time, I let him see it. Bank confirmation. Temporary review initiated. He didn't know what it meant, but he knew enough to recognize it wasn't routine. What's that? He asked too quickly. Just housekeeping, I said. Another small shift in his posture. There it was, the first crack. I took a sip of coffee and let the moment breathe before placing the cup down carefully. Timing matters. Always has. I went through the accounts last night, I said, not looking away from him. There are transfers I didn't authorize. There it was, not loud, not emotional, just placed between us like a fact that had been waiting its turn. He blinked once, twice. That's not, he started, then stopped, adjusting mid-sentence. It's probably just something automated. You know how those things can look. I didn't respond immediately. I let him hear how weak that sounded in the quiet kitchen. Same account? I added. Regular intervals, increasing amounts. Now he didn't reach for his coffee. Duncan, I said. Still calm, still measured. If you're going to lie, at least give it some effort. That landed. For a moment, the version of him I had lived with for decades slipped, and something sharper showed through. Not guilt. Not yet. Irritation. Calculation. It's for the family, he said finally. I didn't think it needed to be a whole discussion every time. The family. I almost admired the choice of words. Broad enough to blur responsibility, vague enough to sound noble. Which part of the family? I asked. He didn't answer right away. That was answer enough. I leaned back slightly, studying him with a clarity that felt almost clinical now. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't poor communication. This was a pattern that had assumed my silence was permanent. I've already contacted the bank, I said. They're reviewing everything. That did it. His jaw tightened just a fraction. Not dramatic. Controlled, but real. You're overreacting, he said. And there it was. The first predictable move. It's not what you think. No, I replied quietly. It's exactly what I think. I just haven't decided yet how much worse it is. Another silence. He didn't fill it this time. Good. I stood, rinsed my cup, and placed it in the sink with the same precision I'd used all morning. No sudden movements, no raised voice. Just control. There's a folder on the counter, I said, nodding toward it. You might want to be very careful about what's inside before you try to explain anything else to me. His eyes flicked to it instinctively. He hadn't expected me to see that. That was his third mistake. I picked up my phone, my bag, and my keys. Where are you going? He asked, the edge finally creeping into his voice. I paused at the doorway, just long enough to answer without turning back. To make sure I'm the last person in this situation who gets surprised. And then I left him standing there, in a house that was starting to feel less like his with every passing minute. The bank didn't keep me waiting. There's a certain tone professionals use when they realize they're no longer dealing with a passive account holder. It's sharper, cleaner, less rehearsed. By the time I sat across from the manager, A woman named Elise with a slate gray blazer and a habit of tapping her pen only when something mattered. The conversation had already moved beyond polite concern. "We've identified the transfers you mentioned," she said, sliding a printed sheet toward me. "They've been structured to avoid immediate attention. Not illegal on the surface, but deliberate. Deliberate." I looked down at the page. Numbers aligned in neat rows, dates spaced just enough to seem incidental. But once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. A quiet siphoning, controlled, patient. "Destination?" I asked. She hesitated for half a second, then turned the page slightly so I could read it clearly. A business account, registered under my son's name. Of course, I didn't react, not outwardly. Inside, something settled into place with a precision that almost felt like relief. Confusion is exhausting. Clarity, even when it cuts, is efficient. "Has my authorization ever been recorded for these?" I asked. "No," Elise replied. "Access was granted through joint permissions, but these specific movements were initiated from a separate device linked to your husband." There it was. Clean. Undeniable. I nodded once. "I want full oversight restored immediately. Any transfer above a minimal threshold requires my direct confirmation. No exceptions." "That can be arranged," she said. "Arrange it." She made a note without hesitation. I gathered the documents slowly, aligning the edges before placing them into my folder. Details matter, not for appearances, for control. "Is there anything else I should be aware of?" I asked. This time, her pause was longer. "There was an inquiry," she said carefully, "about liquidating a property asset. Preliminary only. No action taken." I didn't need to ask which one. The inn. My father's inn. The one thing I had never, not once, suggested selling. "Who made the inquiry?" I asked. She met my eyes directly now. "Your husband." Of course he had. I let out a slow breath, not from shock, but from confirmation. Every piece was lining up exactly where it belonged. Money moving quietly, property being positioned, conversations happening without me in the room. Last night wasn't an accident. It was convenience. "Thank you," I said, standing. Elise nodded. "If you need documentation for legal purposes, I will," I replied. "Soon." Outside, the air felt colder than it had the night before, sharper against my skin. I welcomed it. It kept everything clear. I didn't go home. Not yet. Instead, I drove to the inn. It stood exactly as it always had. Steady, self-contained, untouched by whatever small schemes people thought they could build around it. The gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled in, a sound I'd known most of my life. Familiar, grounding. Inside, the scent hit me immediately. Wood, citrus oil, and something faintly sweet from the kitchen. Someone had been baking early. Good. That meant things were still running properly. Marianne, who had managed the place with me for years, looked up from the front desk as I entered. "You're early," she said, then paused, reading my face the way only someone who'd earned that right could. "Something wrong?" I placed my folder on the counter between us. "Not wrong," I said. "Just uncovered." That was enough for her. We moved into the back office without another word. I spread the documents out, not dramatically, just clearly. Transfers, names, dates. She scanned them quickly, her expression tightening with each line. "They're trying to leverage this," she said quietly. "Position it as underperforming, maybe. Create pressure to sell." "They've already asked the bank," I replied. Her jaw set. "They don't understand this place," she said. No, I agreed. They understand exactly what it's worth. That was the problem. I closed the folder again, slower this time. From this point forward, I said, nothing changes here without my direct approval. Staffing, suppliers, bookings, everything stays exactly as it is unless it comes through me. Marianne nodded immediately. No questions. No hesitation. Good. I turned toward the window, looking out over the grounds. Still intact. Still mine. For now. Behind me, Marianne spoke again, more carefully this time. You're going to confront him. It wasn't a question. Yes, I said, but not yet. Because the truth, once spoken, doesn't just land, it exposes. And I intended to make sure there was nowhere left for him, or any of them, to hide when it did. I stayed at the inn longer than I needed to, not because I was avoiding anything, but because this was the only place that still felt structurally honest. Every beam, every ledger, every booking, it all made sense. No hidden intentions, no quiet manipulations, just cause and effect, work and result. Marianne had already gone back to the front, leaving me alone in the office with the documents spread out one more time. I didn't reread them. I didn't need to. Once you see a pattern clearly, going over it again is just a way of delaying action. Instead, I opened my phone and pulled up something else. The family group chat. Still active, still casual. Messages from earlier that morning. My daughter sharing a photo of some overly decorated brunch plate. My son reacting with a lazy thumbs up. Duncan sending a neutral comment like everything was intact. No mention of last night. Not even an attempt to rewrite it. That told me something important. They hadn't coordinated a story yet, which meant whatever they'd done, they assumed it didn't require one. I typed a message. Let's have dinner. All of us. Tomorrow evening? I looked at it for a second, then added, my treat. That part mattered. Within seconds, the responses started. My daughter first. Finally, that sounds nice. My son next. Yeah, we should. And then Duncan. A little slower. Of course. No hesitation, no caution, no curiosity about why I was suddenly the one inviting them. Good. I set the phone down and let out a quiet breath. Not relief, just confirmation. They were still underestimating me. I stood, walked over to the window again, and watched as one of the staff carried a tray across the courtyard. Porcelain cups, polished, balanced perfectly. Details held together here because people respected the structure. At home, structure had been optional. That difference was going to matter. I picked up my phone again, but this time I called my attorney. I want to accelerate everything, I said when she answered. And I'm going to need documents prepared for presentation. There was a pause. Presentation? She asked. Yes, I replied. I'd prefer not to have repeated conversations. I'd rather be clear once. I understand, she said. We can prepare accordingly. I'll send you the financial records within the hour, and I want the property documents reviewed again, specifically anything that could have been positioned for signature without my explicit consent. We'll go through everything. I know, I said. That's why I'm calling you. I ended the call and immediately forwarded the files from the bank. No delay. No reconsideration. Then I made one more call. The restaurant. Not the one from last night. A different one. Smaller. More controlled. Private rooms available, but with better visibility. A layout where no one could shift the tone of the evening without being seen doing it. Yes, I said when the manager picked up. I'd like to reserve a table for tomorrow evening. 4 guests. I paused, considering. Actually, I added, make it 5. There was a brief silence on the other end. Of course, he said. Any special arrangements? Yes, I replied. I'll need the table set early, and I'd prefer if the service was uninterrupted. Understood. I gave him the name, not mine, the inn's. That mattered too. When I ended the call, I finally allowed myself to sit down again, just for a moment. Not to rest, to think. Because there was one more layer to this. Something that had been sitting just beneath the surface since last night. Something I hadn't fully touched yet. They hadn't just ignored me. They had chosen a different room, a different table, a different conversation. And whatever had been said there, whatever plans had been laid out without me, I was about to walk straight into the consequences of it. But this time, I wouldn't be the one waiting. I picked up my bag, closed the office door behind me, and stepped back into the steady rhythm of the inn one last time before everything shifted. Tomorrow night, they would all show up, smiling, relaxed, certain. And for the first time in a very long while, I was looking forward to dinner. I got home just before dusk. The house was quieter than usual, but not empty. That particular kind of silence, the one that settles when someone knows something is off, but hasn't decided how to approach it yet. Duncan was in the living room, a glass of something amber in his hand, the television on, but muted. He looked up the moment I stepped in. There it was again. That quick scan of my face, trying to read which version of me had walked through the door. You were out all day, he said, like it was an observation, not a question. Yes, I replied, setting my bag down. A pause. He expected more. I didn't give it. He shifted slightly, placing the glass down with more care than usual. We should probably talk about this, he added, gesturing vaguely between us, as if the problem was something shared, something balanced. We will, I said. Tomorrow. That caught him off guard. Tomorrow? He repeated. Why not now? Because I've already made arrangements, I said calmly. Dinner. All of us. I watched the information land. There was a flicker of relief first, small, instinctive. In his mind, this meant things could still be managed. A dinner meant conversation. Conversation meant influence. Good, he said, a little too quickly. That's good. We should clear the air. Yes, I agreed. We should. I moved past him toward the kitchen, not rushing, not lingering, letting him sit with that. Where? He asked after a moment. I opened the cabinet, took out a glass, and poured water. You'll see, I said. Another pause. He didn't like that. Control, even in small details like location, had always mattered to him. And now it was gone. All right, he said finally, trying to recover something resembling ease. If that's what you want. I turned back to him then, just briefly. It is. That was enough. He picked up his drink again, but he didn't sip it right away. His grip tightened slightly, the knuckles just a shade lighter than before. Subtle. But there. Good. Because if he was starting to feel uncertain, it meant he was starting to understand that this wasn't a conversation he could steer. I stepped back into the hallway and started up the stairs. Behind me, his voice came again. You're not seriously blowing this out of proportion, are you? I stopped halfway up. Not because I needed to think, because timing matters. I turned just enough so he could hear me clearly, but not see my full expression. No, I said. I'm adjusting it to the right proportion. Silence. Real silence this time. I continued upstairs without waiting for a response. In the bedroom, everything was exactly where I'd left it. Neat, ordered, predictable. I opened the wardrobe and looked at the rows of clothing, selecting something simple, structured. Not for tonight, for tomorrow. Because presentation isn't vanity, it's strategy. I laid the outfit out carefully, then moved to the dresser and opened the top drawer. Inside, tucked beneath a stack of documents, was something I hadn't touched in years. A copy of the original deed to the inn. I took it out, ran my fingers lightly along the edge, then placed it into my folder with the rest. Downstairs, I could hear Duncan moving again, pacing now. Slower steps, measured, thinking. Good. Let him think. Let him try to reconstruct whatever version of control he believed he still had. He wouldn't find it. I closed the drawer, picked up my phone, and checked the time. Less than 24 hours. That was all it would take. Not to fix anything, but to reveal everything. And once that happened, there would be no quiet ways left out for him, or for any of them. I didn't sleep long. Not because I was restless, but because I didn't need to. When things finally become clear, your mind stops circling and starts aligning. I woke up before the alarm, the house still quiet, the air carrying that faint, stale stillness of a place where too many things have been left unsaid for too long. Downstairs, Duncan was already awake. That alone told me enough. He was at the kitchen counter, not sitting, not relaxed, standing, scrolling through his phone like he was trying to catch up to something that had already moved ahead of him. He looked up as I entered, and this time there was no attempt at casual warmth. "Morning," he said. "Morning." I moved past him, reached for the kettle, and filled it without asking if he wanted anything. That small omission didn't go unnoticed. It never does when patterns break. "We should get on the same page before tonight," he said, watching me carefully. I turned the stove on, the soft click of ignition cutting through the space between us. "About what?" I asked. He exhaled slowly, like he was choosing his words with more care than usual. "About how we present this," he said. "There's no reason to make things uncomfortable." There it was, not truth, presentation. I let that sit there for a moment before answering. "I'm not presenting anything," I said. "I'm clarifying." His jaw tightened again. "You're assuming the worst," he replied. "You've taken a few details and built a whole narrative around them." I turned to face him then, leaning lightly against the counter. "A few details," I repeated. He held my gaze, but there was something new behind it now. Not confidence, not control. Assessment. "Good. Then this should be easy for you," I continued. "Tonight will be your opportunity to explain everything clearly." "I've already tried to explain." "No," I said, cutting in just enough to stop him, not enough to escalate. "You've tried to smooth. That's different." Silence again. He looked away first this time. That mattered. I poured hot water into my cup, added a thin slice of lemon instead of milk. Another small change. Another signal. Behind me, I heard him shift his weight. "You're making this bigger than it is," he said, quieter now. "It was just a dinner. People got busy." I didn't turn around. "No," I said calmly. "The dinner was small. That's why it was so revealing." That landed. I picked up my cup and walked toward the table, setting it down with the same steady precision I'd carried through everything since last night. "I know about the transfers," I added, almost casually, "and the inquiry about the inn." This time, the silence hit harder. I didn't need to look at him to know what that did. "You went to the bank," he said after a moment. "Yes." Another pause. "They don't understand the full context," he said, recovering slightly. "That account, it's helping our son. He needed support." "Our son needed support," I repeated. "So you decided that meant you didn't need my consent." "It wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that." I took a sip of tea, letting the warmth settle before continuing. "And the inn?" I asked. "Was that also about helping someone?" He didn't answer immediately. That was becoming a pattern. "It was just an inquiry," he said finally. "No decisions were made." "By you," I replied. His expression shifted, not dramatically, but enough. He hadn't expected me to phrase it that way, because that's what this really was. Decisions. Made in rooms I wasn't invited into. I let the silence stretch just a little longer, then stood up. "I've arranged everything for tonight," I said. "Time, place, structure." He looked at me sharply. "Structure?" he repeated. "Yes." I picked up my phone, my folder, and my keys again. "And Duncan," I added, pausing just long enough to make sure he was listening. "If there's anything else I should know before we sit down at that table?" I turned slightly, meeting his eyes one last time. This is the moment to say it. He held my gaze. For a second, I almost thought he might, but then he didn't. Of course he didn't. "Then I'll see you tonight," I said. And just like that, whatever chance he had to control what came next, if there ever really was one, was gone. I didn't go home again before the dinner. There was no reason to. Everything that needed to be said there had already been said, or avoided. And avoidance only works until it meets structure. Today was about structure. I returned to the inn instead, not for comfort, for alignment. Marianne met me in the courtyard, a clipboard in her hand, already moving through the day with that steady, efficient rhythm I trusted more than most people. "Everything's set here," she said without preamble. "Deliveries confirmed. Staff briefed. No surprises." "Good," I replied. She studied me for a moment, then added, "You're not coming back here tonight, are you?" "No," I said. "Tonight happens elsewhere." She nodded once. No questions. She understood the difference between preparation and execution. Inside, I took a slower walk than usual. Through the dining room, past the windows, along the corridor where the light always hit just right in the late afternoon. Details, anchors, reminders that not everything in my life had been quietly rearranged without my consent. In the office, I laid everything out one last time. Bank records, transfer logs, property documents, the deed, and the prepared papers my attorney had finalized just an hour earlier. I didn't stack them randomly. I ordered them. Sequence matters when truth unfolds. Not for drama, but for clarity. Each piece needed to land exactly when it was supposed to. My phone buzzed. A message from my daughter. "What time tonight?" No tension, no hesitation, just expectation. I replied, 7 p.m. A second message followed almost immediately. "Where?" I looked at the screen for a moment, then locked it without answering. Let them arrive without control. That was part of it. At 5:30, I left the inn. Not rushed, not delayed, right on time. The drive was quiet. No music. No distractions. Just the road and the steady, almost surgical calm that had settled into me since last night. This wasn't anger anymore. Anger burns unevenly. This was something else. Precision. The restaurant was exactly as I'd requested. discreet, controlled. The kind of place where conversations don't spill unless you let them. The manager met me at the entrance. "Everything is prepared," he said. "I'd like to see the room," I replied. He led me in. 5 chairs, not 4. Set evenly, no hierarchy, no obvious head of the table. I walked around it once, adjusting one glass slightly, aligning a fork that didn't quite match the angle of the others. Small corrections. Final ones. "Service will be timed," he added, as requested. Good. I placed my folder on the table, not in front of any specific seat. Centered. Let them all see it. Let them all wonder. By 6:45, I was already seated. Not waiting. Ready. The first to arrive was my son. He walked in with that familiar ease, casual, slightly distracted, already assuming the evening would unfold around him the way it always had. He spotted me, smiled, and stepped forward. "Hey, Mom," he said, leaning in like this was normal. "This is nice." I nodded once. "It is." He glanced at the table, at the extra setting, at the folder, just briefly, then sat down without asking. Next came my daughter, more polished, more aware. Her eyes moved faster, taking in details, adjusting quicker. She kissed my cheek lightly, then pulled back just enough to study my expression. "You look good," she said. "I am," I replied. She sat. Then Duncan. He entered last. Of course he did. He paused at the doorway for half a second, just long enough to take in the room, the arrangement, the positions. I watched it happen. The calculation, the attempt to read the structure before stepping into it. Then he walked in, controlled, composed, too late. He took his seat, all 4 of them at the table. All of them still thinking this was a conversation. I folded my hands lightly in front of me and let the silence settle just long enough to shift the weight of the room. No one spoke first. Good. That meant they felt it. "Thank you for coming," I said finally, my voice calm, even, unmistakably steady. My son smiled slightly. "Of course. We said we would." "Yes," I replied. "You did." A small pause. Then I rested my hand lightly on the folder in the center of the table, and that was the moment the evening actually began. For a moment, no one reached for the menus. That alone told me everything. People who feel in control occupy space quickly. They talk, they order, they fill silence before it turns on them. But here, now, the silence had weight. And for the first time, they could feel it. My daughter was the first to move, just slightly. She adjusted her glass, glanced at Duncan, then back at me. "So," she said, carefully light, "this is a bit formal for a makeup dinner." "It is," I replied. My son leaned back in his chair, trying to reintroduce ease into the room. "Mom, you didn't have to go all out like this," he said with a half smile. "We said we'd fix it." "Yes," I said again. "You did." I let that sit there. Duncan didn't speak, not yet. He was watching, measuring, waiting for an opening that wasn't coming. Good. A server entered quietly, placed water, and left without interrupting the atmosphere. Exactly as requested. I rested my fingertips lightly on the folder. "You were all busy the other night," I said. "Important things. Other plans." My daughter exhaled softly, already preparing the narrative. "It just got complicated, Mom. Timing, schedules." "Where were you?" I asked. Not sharp, not loud, precise. She paused, just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. My son shifted in his seat. "Does it matter?" he said. "We're here now." "It does," I replied. Another silence. Then Duncan finally stepped in, his tone smooth, controlled. "We were at the club," he said. "A last-minute dinner. It wasn't planned the way you think." The club. There it was, out in the open. I nodded once, slowly, as if confirming something I'd already written down. "And what was discussed there?" I asked. My son let out a quiet breath, a hint of irritation slipping through. "Mom, come on," he said. "Do we really need to turn this into—" "Yes," I said. That stopped him. Completely. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lean forward. I didn't change anything except the finality in that one word. "Yes." The room tightened. I let my hand move, just slightly, opening the folder. Paper against wood. A soft, controlled sound. I slid one sheet forward. Not all of them. Just one. Transfer records. Clean. Undeniable. My daughter's eyes dropped to it first. Then my son's. Duncan didn't look immediately. He already knew. "These," I said, "are not misunderstandings." No one spoke. "They're decisions," I continued, "made repeatedly, quietly, without me." My son leaned forward now, tension replacing that earlier ease. "That money was helping," he said. "You know that. I needed—" "You needed," I repeated. "And he decided." I glanced at Duncan. "Without asking me." Duncan finally looked at the paper. Then at me. "It wasn't meant to be hidden," he said. I almost smiled. "Then why wasn't it said out loud?" That landed harder than anything else so far, because there's no good answer to a simple truth. My daughter shifted again, this time less controlled. "You're making it sound worse than it is," she said. "It's family. We help each other." "Yes," I said. "We do." I reached into the folder again, this time a second document, slid it forward, slower, more deliberate. "The bank inquiry," I said, "about the inn." That changed everything. My son went still. My daughter's expression cracked, just slightly. And Duncan didn't move at all. "Just a preliminary question," he said after a moment. "No action was taken." "By me," I replied. Silence. Thicker now. He held my gaze, but there was something different in it. Not control, not confidence. Exposure. I leaned back slightly, letting the weight of everything settle across the table. And then, right there, at the exact point where the room stopped pretending. "Now tell me honestly, what would you do sitting there?" They didn't just forget her. They rearranged her life without asking. Would you stay calm like this? Or flip the entire table? I folded my hands again, calm returning like it had never left. "This," I said quietly, "is where we stop pretending this is about a missed dinner." And for the first time that evening, no one tried to interrupt me. No one reached for the papers this time. That was the difference. A few minutes ago, they still believed this was something they could talk their way around. Now they understood, at least partially, that every word they chose would land on record, not emotion. Duncan leaned forward slightly, hands clasped, posture controlled. "All right," he said. "Let's not escalate this into something it doesn't need to be." I watched him carefully. There it was again. Control through tone, reduction through language. "This already is what it is," I replied. "You don't get to scale it down now." My son exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "Mom, I needed help," he said. "Things weren't working out and yeah, Dad stepped in. That's what family does." I nodded once. "Family asks," I said. "It wasn't that simple," he pushed back. "You would have said no." I held his gaze, and that would have been my right. That stopped him. Not because he agreed, because he couldn't argue with it. My daughter shifted again, leaning in this time, softer approach. Okay, she said. Maybe it wasn't handled perfectly, but this. She gestured toward the documents. This feels like you're building a case against us. I am, I said. No hesitation, no apology. The words landed clean, sharp, undeniable. Duncan's expression hardened. That's unnecessary, he said. We can resolve this privately. No, I replied, we could have. Before. Silence again. Different now. Less confusion. More realization. I reached into the folder once more. This time I didn't pull out just a sheet. I placed a full set of documents on the table, neatly aligned, centered. Divorce filings, I said. No one moved. Not immediately. It's interesting, the exact second when denial stops functioning. It doesn't explode. It pauses, and then it disappears. My daughter blinked first. Wait, she said. You're serious. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My son leaned forward, his voice lower now. You're doing this over money? He asked. I looked at him, carefully. This isn't about money, I said. Money is just the part you can measure. Duncan finally reached for the documents. Slowly, like touching them might confirm something he still hoped wasn't fully real. This is extreme, he said, scanning the first page. You don't dismantle a family over miscommunication. I let a small pause pass. Then, you dismantled it, I said quietly. You just did it quietly enough to think I wouldn't notice. That hit. Harder than anything before. Because it wasn't emotional. It was accurate. He looked up at me then, and for the first time since this began, there was no attempt to soften his expression. You're overplaying this, he said. There's no fraud here, no betrayal. Just decisions you don't like. I leaned forward slightly. Just enough. There is a forged positioning of consent, I said. There are unauthorized transfers. And there is an attempt to evaluate and potentially liquidate an asset that does not belong to you. Each word placed, measured, final. And if you want to test how that sounds outside this room, I added, we can. Silence. Heavy now. My daughter looked between us, something close to panic starting to break through her composure. Mom, don't do this like this, she said. We can fix it. I turned to her, and for a brief moment, just a fraction, something softer passed through me. Not weakness, recognition, but it didn't change anything. This is me fixing it, I said. Across the table, Duncan set the papers down. Carefully. Too carefully. A man trying not to show that his options were collapsing faster than he could reorganize them. You've made your point, he said. There's no need to drag this further. I leaned back again. Calm, unmoved. This isn't the point, I said. Another pause. Then I added, this is the consequence. No one spoke after that, because there was nothing left in the room that could reduce what had already been said. And for the first time that evening, they weren't thinking about how to control the situation. They were thinking about how much of it they had already lost. The silence didn't break all at once. It fractured. My son was the first to lose his footing completely. He leaned forward, elbows on the table now, no more pretending at composure. This is insane, he said, his voice lower but sharper. You're acting like we stole from you. I looked at him without blinking. You did, I said. That landed harder than anything before. Not because it was louder, because it removed interpretation. My daughter shook her head immediately, almost instinctively rejecting the word itself. No, that's not fair, she said. That's not what this is. Then explain it, I replied. She opened her mouth, stopped, closed it again, because there wasn't a version of it that sounded clean when said out loud. Duncan shifted slightly, reclaiming space at the table, trying to reassemble something resembling authority. Enough, he said. This is going nowhere productive. It already has, I replied. He ignored that. This kind of escalation, he continued, it damages everyone. You don't come back from this cleanly. I tilted my head just slightly. I'm not trying to come back, I said. That was the moment it truly settled over them. Not anger, not negotiation. Finality. My daughter's voice dropped when she spoke again. Mom, please, she said. You're making a permanent decision over something we can still talk through. I turned to her, steady. You're asking for time, I said. After taking actions that didn't give me any. Her eyes flickered. That was the first real crack. My son pushed his chair back slightly, frustration spilling through now without restraint. What did you expect? He said. That everything just runs perfectly forever? That no one ever needs help? I expected honesty, I said. You would have said no. Yes, I replied. And that would have been the end of it. He let out a short, bitter laugh. Exactly. There it was. Not regret, not apology, just justification. I leaned back, studying him the same way I had studied Duncan earlier. Patterns repeat. That's how you recognize them. You didn't need help, I said quietly. You needed access. That hit. He didn't respond this time, because he couldn't. Duncan stepped in again, sharper now. This is turning into an attack, he said. On your own family. I held his gaze. No, I said. This is a response to one. Silence again, but different now. No one was trying to smooth anything anymore. The masks had shifted from pleasant to defensive. That was progress. I reached into the folder one last time. Not new documents. Copies. Additional ones. I placed them down beside the originals. Everything here has already been reviewed, I said. Legally. That word settled heavily. My daughter's head snapped slightly toward me. You've already, she started. Yes. I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. Duncan's expression changed again. Not dramatically, but enough. The calculations were accelerating now. Outcomes, exposure, containment. Too late. You should have told me before taking it this far, he said. I almost smiled. I should have told you, I repeated. Before acting on something that affects both of us? He didn't answer, because now he could hear it. The mirror. I let a few seconds pass. Then I spoke again, quieter this time. There was a room, I said. 2 nights ago. I sat in it for 2 hours. No one moved. No one interrupted. You all made sure I wasn't in the one you chose instead. That was the line that stayed. Not loud. Not aggressive. But it stripped everything down to its core. My daughter looked down. My son didn't. Duncan held my gaze. But there was nothing left in it to negotiate with. Only recognition. I folded my hands again, resting them lightly on the table. And for the first time since this began, no one tried to argue. Because now, finally, they understood exactly what they had done, and exactly what it had cost them. Duncan was the one who tried to recover it. Not emotionally, strategically. You're not thinking clearly, he said, his tone shifting into something colder, more deliberate. You're taking isolated actions and building a legal narrative that doesn't hold. I didn't respond immediately. I let the sentence sit there, unsupported. Because that's the thing about statements like that. They rely on momentum. If you don't give them anything to push against, They collapse on their own. No, I said finally. I'm removing your ability to reshape it. That was when he changed tactics. Subtle, but visible. You've been under pressure, he continued. 70 is not a small milestone. Emotions run high. People misinterpret things. There it was, not confrontation, undermining. My daughter looked at him quickly, not surprised, but cautious. She recognized the direction this was going. I didn't move. Say it properly, I said. A pause. Duncan held my gaze. If you're going to suggest I'm not capable of making my own decisions, I continued, calm and precise, you should say it directly. Another pause. Longer this time. Because now he had to choose, and whatever he chose would stay in the room. I'm saying, he replied carefully, that you might be overestimating the severity of the situation. I nodded once. That's not what you were about to say, I replied. Silence. My son shifted again, less confident now. Dad, maybe, he started. But Duncan didn't look at him. He was still looking at me, measuring, adjusting, trying to find one angle that still worked. There wasn't one. I reached for the final set of documents. Not new evidence, authority. I placed them down slowly. Medical competency evaluation, I said. Requested preemptively. Completed this afternoon. That changed the room instantly. My daughter leaned forward, eyes narrowing slightly. You had that done? She asked. Yes. I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. The implication was clear. I had already closed the door he was trying to open. Duncan's jaw tightened, not with anger this time, with something closer to recognition. You really went all the way with this, he said. I finished what you started, I replied. That landed. Because now the framing was complete. Not escalation. Continuation. My son let out a slow breath, running his hand across his face. This is getting out of control, he muttered. No, I said. This is it, coming under control. Another silence. But now it wasn't defensive. It was contained. They were no longer trying to dominate the conversation. They were trying to understand the boundaries of it. And those boundaries had already been set. I leaned back slightly, giving them space, not out of generosity, out of certainty. You wanted efficiency, I said. Quiet decisions. Clean outcomes. No one interrupted. This is what that looks like when I do it. My daughter looked at the documents again, then back at me. You're not leaving room for anything, she said. I held her gaze. You didn't leave me any. That was it. That was the line that closed the circle. No raised voice, no dramatic movement, just alignment. Across the table, Duncan exhaled slowly, leaning back for the first time that evening. Not in control, not even pretending, just aware. And that was enough. Because once someone understands they've lost control, they stop negotiating outcomes and start calculating damage. I folded the documents neatly, placing them back into the folder with the same precision as before. Nothing rushed, nothing emotional, just finished. And for the first time since the dinner began, the conversation wasn't waiting to continue. It was waiting to end. No one stood up right away. That was the final shift. At the beginning of the evening, they had walked in like they owned the rhythm of the room, ready to steer, to soften, to redirect. Now they sat still, as if moving too quickly might make everything worse. Duncan was the first to break it, but not with words. He reached for the water, took a slow sip, then set the glass down with care. No performance left, no strategy worth playing. All right, he said quietly. What happens next? Not what do we do? Not how do we fix this? What happens next? I noticed that. You sign, I said. Or you don't. Simple, clean, final. My son looked between us, tension tightening across his shoulders. And if he doesn't? He asked. I turned to him. Then it proceeds anyway, I said, just less efficiently. He exhaled, shaking his head slightly. This is unbelievable, he muttered. No, I replied. It's just unfamiliar to you. That landed, because for the first time, he was on the side of something he couldn't influence. My daughter spoke next, quieter than before. And us? She asked. Where do we stand in all this? I held her gaze. Exactly long enough. You stand exactly where you placed yourselves, I said. No anger, no softness, just position. Her eyes dropped for a moment. That was enough. Duncan leaned forward slightly again, but this time there was no attempt to dominate the space. Just a man trying to understand the limits of what he'd lost. You're cutting everything off, he said. No, I replied. I'm separating it. Another pause. He nodded once, slowly, because he understood the difference. I reached into the folder one last time and pulled out a smaller document. Not as thick, not as heavy. I placed it closer to my son this time. A formal repayment structure, I said. For what was taken? His eyes snapped to it. You're serious? He asked. Yes. That's not how this works, he said quickly. I'm your son. And that, I replied, is exactly why this is how it works. Silence. Again. But now it wasn't sharp. It was settling. Consequences tend to do that. Once they're clear, they don't need to be repeated. My daughter looked at Duncan. He didn't look back. That told her everything she needed to know. I closed the folder slowly, aligning the edges one final time before resting my hand on top of it. This isn't punishment, I said. It's correction. No one argued, because there was nothing left to argue with. Duncan stood first. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just done. I'll have my attorney review this, he said. Of course, I replied. My son didn't move right away. He stared at the paper in front of him, like it might change if he looked at it long enough. It wouldn't. My daughter stood next, slower, her composure still intact, but thinner now. I didn't think it would go like this, she said quietly. I looked at her. It already had, I replied. That was the last thing I said to her. They began to leave, one by one. No raised voices, no slammed doors. Just the quiet exit of people who had finally understood the cost of what they thought they could manage. Duncan was the last to step away from the table. He paused for half a second, not to speak, just to look at me, and for the first time in years. There was no assumption in his expression, no certainty, just recognition. Then he turned and left. I remained seated. The room felt larger now, not emptier, clearer. The server approached carefully after a moment, unsure if the evening was over. It is, I said. He nodded and stepped back. I reached for my glass, took a slow sip, and let the silence settle fully this time. Not heavy, not sharp. Earned. Everything that needed to be said had been said. Everything that needed to be exposed had been placed exactly where it belonged. And for the first time since that candle burned down in an empty room, I wasn't waiting for anyone. I didn't leave immediately. There's a difference between finishing something and walking away from it. One requires movement. The other requires stillness. I stayed at the table a little longer, not out of hesitation, but because I wanted to feel the full weight of what had just happened, without interruption, without noise, without anyone trying to reshape it into something softer than it was. The server returned quietly, placing a small plate in front of me. "Compliments of the kitchen," he said. I looked down. A simple dessert. Clean, precise, not overly decorated, just well made. I almost smiled. "Thank you," I said. This time I ate it without waiting. No empty chairs, no checking the door, no measuring time against disappointment. Just present. When I finally stood, I didn't rush. I took my folder, my coat, and stepped out into the night air that felt noticeably different from the one 2 evenings ago. Not colder, not warmer, clearer. My phone buzzed once as I reached the car. A message from Duncan. "We need to talk." I looked at it for a second, then locked the screen. Not tonight. Not like that. I got into the car, started the engine, and for a moment, just sat there with my hands resting lightly on the wheel. 70. It's an interesting number. People assume it means slowing down, softening, becoming smaller in ways that make others comfortable. Easier to manage. Easier to overlook. They forget something. You don't reach 70 by accident. You get there by learning, adjusting, surviving, and eventually, deciding. I pulled out onto the road without looking back. Not because there was nothing behind me, but because everything behind me had already revealed exactly what it was. By the time I reached home, the house was dark again. But this time, it didn't feel indifferent. It felt temporary. I walked inside, set my folder down on the table, and stood there for a moment, letting the quiet settle one last time. No tension, no waiting, no second guessing, just space. Clean, earned. Upstairs, the bedroom door was slightly open. I didn't go in. Not yet. Instead, I turned off the lights one by one, moving through the house with the same steady precision I'd carried through everything else. Closing, not collapsing. There's a difference. Back in the kitchen, I poured myself a glass of water and leaned lightly against the counter, allowing one final thought to surface before the night ended. They didn't forget me. They revealed themselves, and I responded. Nothing more, nothing less. I'll tell you, I would have done the same. Quiet, precise, no screaming, no begging, just facts and consequences. If you respect yourself, people either learn or they lose access to you. That's it. If you felt this story, like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what you would have done.